Good afternoon. My name is Michael Tucci. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Lexington Wealth Management. I'm joined today by David Morton, Chief Market Strategist from Rocaton, our strategic partner on the investment area, and with Professor Glenn Frank, who is the Director of Tax Strategy as it relates to portfolios here at Lexington Wealth Management. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
We are several weeks away from a presidential election, and we seem to have two candidates that are somewhat polarizing out there right now. And we've had a number of clients reach out to us and ask us what they should do about their portfolio if the other one wins. Each side convinced, in many cases, that it won't be good if the other candidate wins. So we at Lexington spent some time looking back at previous presidential election cycles to examine what did indeed happen under different circumstances. So we're hoping to share some of that with you. We're also going to look beyond that and to see what other factors may affect markets. And we'll take that from there, and David will do that work. Lastly, Professor Glenn Frank is going to look at the tax implications of different folks getting elected, whether it be a Democrat or Republican under different tax strategy, how we could better position portfolios given who is elected. And so we'll take it from there. So we're going to start by looking at political polarization. I think many people in this country feel right now that the right has become further right and the left has become further left. And first we're asking ourselves, is that true? So as you can see in the slide in front of you, over the last many years, we've seen an increase in Republicans voting more Republican and Democrats voting more Democratic. And so each side staying with their party. So less original thinking, if you will, and parties sticking together. Some wonder where this comes from, and I've heard a number of pundits speak to it. Some have said it is the cable effect, where cable stations now will present a point of view honoring their side, not the other side. Versus the old days when we were watching network TV, we were all presented with the same news and information, and we had to make our own opinions from there. Others have talked about redistricting, and how redistricting has caused the right to move further right and the left to move further left. This has further manifested itself in looking at congressional and presidential approval ratings. What we've found over the last many years is that presidential approval ratings have hovered somewhere around 50%. A little above, a little below, not much difference. But in terms of the House and Senate, we've seen a great disparity in terms of their approval rating of folks running in the Congress. And they're currently at all-time lows. The next slide is on political party dominance. And what this slide essentially shows us is that whomever is elected president tends to lose seats in the House and the Senate in midterm elections. This system is a form of checks and balances, and some will say it's almost a reversion to the mean, which helps keep the system in check and things from going too far astray. Next is the annual market return by party. And this is broken up into three categories. It's the President, the Senate, and the House. And under almost all conditions, markets make money regardless of how the presidency and Congress is configured. Reassuring somewhat. Next, we're going to look at a study from Delbar, which is a consulting firm that does a lot of research in and around markets. And what we notice is over the last 20 years, the S&P 500 has returned 9.9%. An investor in a 60-40 portfolio has enjoyed a return of 8.7%. Yet what we find is the average investor only earned a return of 2.5%, and inflation was at 2.4%. So this difference between that 60-40 portfolio of 8.7 and 2.5% that the average investor has earned is a 6.2% gap. We're going to call that an emotional tax. And what I submit to you is that an election is a trap for an emotional tax. People tend to get pretty amped up around their candidate. And when the candidate doesn't win, tend to do extreme things in and around their portfolio. And guess what? Usually it doesn't work out for them very well. So those are my comments as CEO of Lexington Wealth Management. I'd like to turn to David Morton, Chief Market Strategist from Rocaton, and get his feelings whether he agrees, disagrees, what he sees out there in the institutional marketplace, and what other factors may affect markets and returns.
It seems easy to assume that the election is a big deal for markets. The electoral cycle in this country is a long electoral cycle going back a couple of years, both for the primaries and also for the current general election itself. It captures a news cycle entirely. You can't pick up the newspaper without reading something about what's going on in the political process. And it feels like these are really big decisions, and as you point out, there's a lot of polarization in policies and views, or views of policies, and so on and so forth. The data from past elections in the US suggests that it's not such a big event, that markets rarely get moved a long way in one direction or the other. People don't wake up the day after the election, and even if there's a surprising result, markets sell off because one candidate won versus another one. That's rarely the outcome, if ever the outcome of an election for markets. So I think perhaps the perception that clients have to take a position and have to do something is exactly this emotional tax that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. The feeling that you need to do something in response to the election is probably a mistake from an investor standpoint, because frankly, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know whether markets go up the day after the election or go down. So it's 50-50 whether they go up or down. I would guess actually that markets perhaps don't change much after the election one way or another, because in the lead up to the actual election a few days ahead of time, we'll have opinion polls that suggest that one candidate is likely to win versus the other, which hopefully markets will discount. We would expect that markets would discount.
So David, talk to me a little bit about, to our clients about Brexit.
So back at the end of June, there was a vote in the United Kingdom on whether to stay in the European Union or to leave the European Union. Opinion polls in a few days prior to the vote were heavily, and had been for a long period of time, heavily leaning towards a vote to stay in the European Union. Mm-hmm. I just guess for the 2 months prior to the vote, probably the gap between those who wanted to stay in versus those who wanted to leave was about 10 or 12 percentage points. So meaningful difference in opinion polls. Then when the vote actually happened, contrary to the opinion polls, there was a vote to leave the European Union. So when markets woke up the next day, they sold off on the day immediately after the election. The stock markets across Europe fell meaningfully, the pound fell meaningfully, interest rates across Europe fell meaningfully. So the market had been taken by surprise. So it feels, if you look at that one day post-Brexit vote, that you can in fact have political decisions or votes where the market gets surprised and the market moves a considerable amount. The reality is that even though the markets were surprised, the following day, or so 2 days after the actual vote, they about faced, and actually the stock market in the UK is higher today than it was at the time of the Brexit vote. Interest rates are meaningfully lower across Europe, and the pound is still quite a bit lower. But as far as the stock market is concerned, the stock market has risen despite, in the immediate aftermath of Brexit, many commentators saying that this was a terrible decision on the part of the British electorate, and that it was going to harm GDP for Britain, was going to push down the stock market and so on. The opposite happened.
Mm-hmm. So, interesting, very interesting. Let's change gears for one moment. Rocaton works with a number of larger institutional investors. That's where the smart money is. What are your institutional investors that both you serve and other institutions that you look at doing relative to elections?
So in the same way as you talked about the emotional tax, when you are an institutional investor, you don't lose your emotions. Mm-hmm. They're still emotional as well. They typically don't necessarily feel that they should react to short-term influences, and typically are not compensated to react to short-term influences either. Typically set a long-term asset allocation and stick to it. Okay. So across our client base, they're just as interested in the outcome of the election. We get just as many questions as you get about what the outcome of the election means and what somebody should do about their investment portfolio, but they're not acting on it. For the most part, they're sticking with their long-term asset allocation, and expect to stick with their long-term asset allocation, regardless of their own political viewpoints or the political viewpoints of whatever investment committee or governance structure that they have.
Okay, so we've covered elections and we've looked at it and found that the best thing to do is very little to nothing. So what does move markets, and how do you position a portfolio to protect you around that?
We were looking at a chart of long-term stock market returns a few days ago, and the first reason why we were looking at it was to see what impact elections had, and you can't really discern any meaningful move in markets as a result of elections from that chart. Where there are large impacts on the market are reactions to probably periods of overvaluation, if we can call it that. There's been two periods in the last 15 years where the stock market fell meaningfully, peak to trough roughly 50%, and that was with the end of the tech boom at the end of the 1990s, and again from 2008 into 2009, where we had the overvaluation of the housing market and over-leverage of the banking system and so on. So those aspects seem to us to be sort of the real influences that change market prices over time.
How about events that no one can anticipate? Not events such as 9/11, oil embargoes, and so on and so forth. What happens in those events? Is there such a thing as portfolio insurance in and around those events?
So by definition, major events that nobody anticipated can have the impact of moving markets considerably. It depends on the nature of the actual event and what the discounted cash flow impact on economy, companies, so on and so forth. September 11th was a major shock to the marketplace, pushed down markets for a period of time. But we had quite a meaningful rebound in the subsequent 1 or 2 year period of time. So you can get shocks like that. And frankly, each crisis that comes along and moves markets considerably, and particularly in a downwards direction, almost by definition, is something that we haven't anticipated. The next crisis are always different than the last crises.
Thank you, David. Professor Glenn Frank, we're going to toggle over to you. We've got two candidates with different tax plans. I don't pretend to be an expert at either one. I know that Hillary talked about taking capital gains, the holding period, extending it, and I know Trump had a proposal in and around fixed income investments, changing the tax structure on that. Does it matter, and would we do anything different at Lexington depending on what tax policy has to not just be proposed, but gets implemented?
Great question, Mike. Yeah, obviously we've talked about a lot of things we can't control. Taxes are something you can control, and it's very material to your portfolio. So what are the implications for Democratic White House versus Republican? As Mike just mentioned, Hillary Clinton has proposed dramatically extending the holding period to get long-term cap gains treatment. Very significant proposal. So basically, the likelihood of short-term gains becomes much greater, and as a result, harvesting losses, that kind of almost pedestrian thing that firms should routinely do, becomes all the more important. Furthermore, one of the major attractions of holding equities in your taxable account is to take advantage of their tax preferential treatment. Well, if that's largely going away, or if it's very painful to get that preferential treatment, you may simply consider holding your equities now in your retirement account. As far as Mr. Trump's proposals, his proposals in general are to significantly reduce marginal tax rates. And so what are the implications to a portfolio? Well, they're pretty significant if in fact it actually gets passed. All your tax planning strategies have less relevance. Maybe muni bonds are no longer as attractive. Maybe you don't worry about short-term gains because they're not all that onerous. Maybe you pay off your mortgage because your tax deduction isn't worthwhile. Maybe you reduce your retirement contributions, again, because taxes aren't that significant. But as Mike mentioned, proposals on the campaign trail versus what actually gets through Congress can be wildly different, and whatever turns out to be, you have to react accordingly. One other point, and that is very often people will state that if a tax law is going to change and it's going to favor or not favor a particular asset class, that suddenly the market's going to dramatically change that asset class. Well, that hasn't been true. People really overstate the implications of tax policy on asset class performance. Take it with a grain of salt.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and thoughts today. Much appreciated. At Lexington, our goal is to make sense of what's going on in the world. We don't pretend to have a crystal ball, but we do put a lot of thought into everything we do on your behalf. Whether it be an election cycle or the next crisis that occurs or a change in tax policy, we're going to think it through and try to be that steady hand at the tiller. Thank you for listening. Have a great afternoon.